Hello, Chris. Welcome to a conversation about non-duality.
Thank you.
Now, I'm not sure what the term non-duality means, so how about talking about that first?
Yeah, the way I would use the term, and I think is the way that it's widely used, is that there isn't a difference. I want to say, in one sense, that there isn't a difference between inner and outer, but that's not the whole thing. That's what happens, but actually, dual is actually very simple. You have good and bad, um, light and dark, all of the simple dualities, and then also the dualities that have to do with judgments about things. And um, so those things are all happening in thought. Thought itself is duality because you're defining things, and that means you're separating them from other things. So when you go into a non-dual world where those opposites don't exist, you're actually going into silence. And that silence doesn't necessarily mean no noise. It means that you're beyond thought. And just to clarify, that doesn't mean you can't be thinking, but you're also at that same time beyond thought.
Is there a purpose in seeking non-duality?
Oh, good question. Um, well, I think, first of all, it's something that really can't be sought because the seeking itself gets in the way. Um, People do seek it, but in the end, it's more like a surrender. It's more like, oh, thoughts aren't doing it for me. So I give up trying to find the solution, and sometimes that takes a long time to finally give it up and just sink into it. And usually, for most people, including I would say for me, that doesn't happen voluntarily. There's usually a struggle because the mind doesn't want to give up. It's used to solving things using language and words and thinking. And so it takes a lot to kind of go through that, to drop into a deeper space. But I have to say as well that there is an urge to do that because we feel ourselves to be contracted, we feel ourselves to be smaller than we potentially are, and I would say that's why people take drugs, particularly psychedelic drugs, mind-expanding drugs, because we really want to experience ourselves as big as we really are, which is not just the contracted mode that we imagine ourselves to be, but big enough to encompass the whole world.
You touched on some issues that are very contemporary, addictions and the suffering that comes with it and so on. And
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily that all kinds of addictions come directly from that need to expand. Some come from the need to medicate because things are too painful. Now, if you take that pain back to its source, you may find that there is an underlying need to experience that relaxation of the thought that of who I am, and that relaxation, the desire for that relaxation may unconsciously be a source of the desire to to medicate. But I should say I don't have an addictive personality, so for me, I feel like I'm talking a little bit abstractly here.
I hear you talking about a different way of being in the world. Is that your experience?
Yes and no. And I don't want to speak for everybody because I think it's different for everybody. I had a teacher that used to call it like a sixth sense or a fifth sense beyond our usual senses and beyond thinking. It's another dimension, you could say, another dimension of experience. So we're in the world and everything is happening normally, but there's also a kind of an essence that becomes visible, and that essence allows us to see that the objects in the world are actually relative. They're not solid. There's not really anything out there that is absolutely, finally true. There's just this essence that encompasses everything.
How did you come to this understanding?
Oh my God. Well, not quickly. Although some people do come by it quickly, I think it gradually emerged from different experiences where the division between self and other disappeared. And when that happened enough times, every time it was in a different way. So someone's voice becomes my voice, somebody's body becomes my body, and so it's very mysterious, and yet it gives you a hint when you have an experience like that, that this I that we think is, we unconsciously assume is in this body, because we don't call the things outside of ourselves I, outside of our bodies I, that's really not the only I, that there's a bigger I that is people and things that are outside ourselves. And that's kind of the beginning of it. And the more that happens, the more it becomes evident that this I is everything.
It's difficult.
Can you say a little bit more about where it's difficult? Because sounds pretty abstract.
I'm finding it hard to feel that difference between the little local I and a universal I.
Right. And yes, and that, so it feels abstract. Can you say that you've never felt that in your life?
No, I can't say that.
So there have been times when you felt that you're
yes.
part of you,
Yeah.
that this larger I is also you. Can you say a little bit about that?
I don't have words for it.
Yeah, that's the problem, is finding the words. Yeah. Because your words also may be different from my words, and
Yes.
that can get in the way.
Yes.
You know, we could be having this wordless experience, but once we start attaching words to it, we are not sure anymore that we're talking about the same experience. And it actually isn't an experience, which makes it more complicated. Because once you drop into that wordless, timeless dimension, experience by nature takes place, by definition, takes place over time. So once you're in that dimension, you're not having an experience. You come back from it and you call it an experience. But you can't find words for it because you were in a wordless place. So it's a little bit of a contradiction, and it's difficult to even, you can say, I had this awakening experience, I had this other awakening experience, but when you try to put words to what that was, it's going to be filtered by your mind and your experiences that you have had that have been more in this world, you might say. And so you might be describing it in a totally different way from someone else.
Yes, that makes sense.
So I think, for me, when I look at those early experiences, there comes a point where you don't have experiences, what we call experiences anymore, in terms of waking up, because it's just there. And sometimes I'm not noticing it. If I'm like stressed or under pressure, probably the times when I need to notice it most are the times when I don't notice it. But when I relax, I can go there. So I don't need to have an experience. I don't need to be pushed into it. Those early experiences were there was a sense of really, really needing it and having to be pushed often by a teacher or someone outside into that experience. But once it becomes more, I think it's sort of like a muscle, and you use that muscle enough, and you know what that muscle is. For most people, I think it comes through transmission initially, that there's someone who's awake in your life, maybe a teacher, maybe not formally a teacher, but someone who becomes a teacher to you, who, and transmission is often misunderstood, so I want to kind of clarify what I mean. I don't mean that somebody has some magic power and they pour it into you, which is often how it's taken to mean. I mean that that energy of awakeness, which is in me and also in the other person, but the other person has recognized it and I haven't recognized it yet. Their awake energy meets mine, and that awakens mine. And so when that happens, it's usually unconscious. It may be unconscious. Sometimes it's not unconscious. Some people are rolling on the floor and everything. But often the personality, the ego, if you will, is so tightly wrapped around the consciousness that it doesn't really penetrate to a conscious level that has even happened. But then you might have a dream or something. I think with me it started off with my first teacher, that I had some dreams, and oh wow, what is this dream? I've never had a dream like this before. And so it's kind of working on an unconscious level. Almost none of it is through intention, at least in my experience. Other people may have other experiences, but from my experience, almost nothing happened through intention. It was all meeting the right person at the right time, and either being thrown into it directly, or just being with that teacher and having that teacher's energy meet my energy.
Meeting with the other person, does it need words, or
No.
is there another way of being present?
No, words can carry the energy if they're the right words and they're coming from the right place, but it doesn't need words. That's why gazing is so powerful, because we're just sitting in silence, and people can focus just on meeting each other in that way.
Gazing at what?
Gazing at
Stargazing?
Gazing, let me clarify. Gazing into each other's eyes. I won't say at, it's into. Into, because as they say, the eyes are the window to the soul. And so when you gaze into someone's eyes, you gaze through their ego, through their consciousness, into something deeper, if you know how to look. And only one person needs to know how to look. Although if both people know, it's more powerful.
Can it be done on the internet?
Yes. That's something I discovered quite recently. It can be done on the internet. And so
Skype or something?
yes, it can be. And I was surprised because I thought it was too subtle of energy to be transmitted. But maybe it's because it is a subtle energy. It's that it can be transmitted half a world away through the internet. It definitely can.
Okay.
So do you have any other questions? Or shall we wrap it up for now? I really enjoyed this interview. Thank you.
Yes, it's been very special. And thank you, Chris.